Children of the New Flesh. Children of the New Flesh is an important collection from Chris Kelso and David Leo Rice. It's something of a Festschrift, a mixed and mingled arrangement of primary research, critical commentary, literature, poetry, philosophy. It's more than a tribute to David Cronenberg, it's an active and creative response to his work. And it really is quite mad, but it's charming and artful and informative. There's an original interview with Cronenberg himself, other interviews with many of his collaborators such as Kathy Koja, Bruce Wagner, Tim Lucas, and there's a great deal of historical and primary research by Nash, Vogel, Kelso, Rice and Graham Ray, who always digs deep as an archaeologist of movies. And here he hits treasure in rediscovering interviews with Cronenberg Sr. on the seriousness of science fiction, and the long shadow cast by the Mengele-like figure of Dr. Ewan Cameron. Dr. Cameron is hyper-real, a celebrity psychiatrist in the pay of the CIA, developing interrogation and thought control techniques. This happened. This is not conspiracy theory. This is high-grade conspiracy empiricism. And Graham Ray makes the most of connecting this to the early works. The collection centres around 7 key works from the mid-1960s into the 1970s. This is a time when freebooters like Anger and Waters were borrowing 16mm cameras, marshalling their friends and making movies by any means possible, but only just possible. Cronenberg's first short movie, Transfer, was made in a weekend for $300. His second, From the Drain, contained stop-motion effects which pushed it to $500. When a young filmmaker works this cheap, it's bound to show. All of these shorts can be seen on YouTube. None of them are trashy, the ideas are plentiful. Already in 1966, Cronenberg is exploring the less than healthy relationship between corporations, medics, authority figures, and their witting or unwitting underlings, patients, collaborators and victims. And although the reader knows that all of these early movies are leading inexorably towards some of the most memorable visual material of any century, the exploding heads, the bug typewriters, conversational anuses, video-loading vaginas, there are even stranger portals which are not just into the body. There is a metaphysics, a metabiology at work here. Sensation is, of course, in the barest bones of any of these narratives. It orbits sensation, but it's never mere sensationalism. One could argue about the limits of good taste, but never once did Cronenberg detonate a head or raise a phallic tubule without good reason. His mature work contains precisely what's lacking in the run-of-the-mill shocker or splatter movie, and that is ideas. As the character Masha says in Videodrome, it has a philosophy, and that's what makes it dangerous. And that is why this book is important. It examines the deepest roots of these ideas, the sensual philosophy which engages with one of the philosophical questions which haunts the last half of 1,000 years, from Spinoza onwards. What can a body do? How far can we extend or modify the body without entirely degrading or destroying it? What are the limits of a body, and how do we approach those limits? How would we know? Why do people accept so little when the possibilities seem so great? As Jonathan Greenaway points out in his essay Clinical Notes on the Early Cronenberg, the basic coordinates of the body, the distinctions between inner and outer space, are called into question by Cronenberg's work. Horror is the terrifyingly close void. Like a therapist or analyst, Cronenberg does not bring us outwards into the world to face some monster, but inwards to consult with the lack or pulsating chaos within ourselves, to deal with the id, the s, the it within us. But this within is uncanny and reversible. The viewer may come to the movie screen hoping for some kind of relation of knowledge, some reciprocity or communication, but is instead forced to deal with themselves. But it's a self which is not a self, an alien internality, an abyss into which we cannot help but stir. It's definitely not a Lacanian mirror, more a confrontational nightmare. As Cronenberg and the people writing in this book know well enough, the role of the human individual in this world is both tragic and vanishingly slight. not even, but especially when they think they're in control. It's in this sense that several of the writers here understand Cronenberg's work as deeply traditional, or rather, deeper than traditional, primordial, mythological. The early movies under discussion in Children of the New Flesh reimagine myths. They bring to life biopsychological fossils from the deep strata of tragedies that run through ancient Greece and Egypt and come from somewhere long before that. The coffin into which Osiris was lured, trapped and mutilated by his brother Set is a machine. It's a basic machine, but no less a machine than a motorcycle or a television set or a teleport pod that Cronenberg would use. The psychic mechanisms of the Osiris story are close relatives to those of Cronenberg's characters, and Kelso and co are well aware of it. I repeat, the role of the human individual is vanishingly slight, and the key word is vanishing. This entire collection explores the horrifying and creative implications of the fact that the human is vanishing. Fantasy is not mere fantasy. It's not inoperative. On the contrary, Imagine is the scaffolding of the so-called real world. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the technologically advanced barbarism of late capitalism. 3 or 5 generations of a city like Chicago can be condemned to poverty by closing industries on the basis of what is imagined to be profitable. Chemical industries which drive genetic mutations and agonizing illnesses are visited on the people of developing nations by megacorporations, and increasingly by inhuman investment algorithms. This is not science fiction or dystopian fantasy. It's political reality, which is to say, body horror. Any number of people can be maimed or killed in acts which start with a fantasy of extracting minerals from tribal land. And what's more politically real than having the ability to decide who lives, how they live, and who dies? The entire collection of writings in Children of the New Flesh takes this dystopia and biopsychic warfare as a given, even as it problematizes the notion of what reality might mean in all of this. As Chris Kelso writes, Cronenberg's cosmic horror is post-tentacular. It may be ontologically slippery, but it's not the seething and far-out Lovecraftian madness of the earliest 20th century. We sense forces are deforming our ability to think, and they've taken a form, beyond what we can grasp. So the most maddening aspect of this moment is that we can feel something is very, very wrong. But it's impossible to say what it is, only that it's already here, and that it did not come from the depths of the ocean or from outer space. Oh no. It comes to us through signals, through phones, through computers. It's alien and also intimate. It's the monstrosity of us. It's the part of us which does not wish us well. As several writers in this collection also point out, humanity is not particularly good at truth or at life. Charlene Elsby's essay is most illuminating on this front. She argues that much of Cronenberg's early works portray humanity's acute discomfort with reality, exploring the preference for deceit. She argues that his short movie The Lie Chair highlights this innate perversity and makes a convincing case that the monsters which we wish to defeat are space, time and causality. The monsters are the constitutive conditions of the human. The conditions of our humanity are the aliens, and in this sense, Elsby is in harmony with Nietzsche's view of the fundamental sickness of humanity. To be human is to be discontented, to be twisted away from nature, to be twisted away from oneself, to be exiled. This human preference for self-delusion is one of the mainsprings of mutation. There is hope, but it's hope of an uncanny variety. For Cronenberg adds a unique twist to the figure of the rebel and the revolutionary in the late 20th century. The fundamental position of all revolutionaries is that change is possible and change is desirable. Cronenberg subverts this subversion. His work asserts that change not only is possible, it's inevitable, and it may come as the nastiest of shocks, more like a rape than a revolution. Change is inevitable whether or not it's desirable. Change is inevitable, but control is not a realistic option. Change is inevitable, but the governments and the shady megacorporations and the scientists who think they are in control of change are as self-deluded as anybody else. Even in the very early films, Stereo, Secret Weapons, Crimes of the Future, we're clearly presented with a sense that destabilisation is the prevalent condition. Revolution is more than merely gestural, but the coordinates of victory are lacking. In Secret Weapons, 1972, the enemy seems to be the religious pharmaceutical company, but when we meet the female gang leader of the armed rebellion against this megacorporation, she too is at prayer. When the drug designer offers chemical weapons to her gang, her response is muted. She doesn't see the point. She says, "We don't fight to win. We don't fight to lose either." There's almost always a warning light that when one becomes morally certain, when one becomes righteous, that's the point of greatest infection and self-delusion and monstrosity. We see this in the religious corporation in Secret Weapons, and in the so-called rebels who are ultimately concerned not with winning or losing, but maintaining equilibrium. We see it even more in Crimes of the Future, among the scientific paedophiles who've rationalised their actions as necessary to save the human race. It's not that Cronenberg has no place for ethics, more that he has every reason to suspect the allegedly ethical drives of those who think they have power. The psychiatrists, the surgeons, the sociologists, however much they misunderstand themselves as saints. As with Greek tragedy, so too Cronenberg's protagonists' attempts to control the situation only deepen the misunderstandings, the mysteries. Whatever choices they thought they made are woven into a fateful biology, or rather, into a bios without a logos. Truly uncontrollable flesh. Many of these early works raise the possibility that there may be advantages to giving up the idea that we, or anybody else, is in charge or could be in charge. This abandonment, I think, is an interesting political and tactical move. There's much more to say about this, and much more to say about the collection, which I can't fit in here, except to mention some very fine creative responses from David Roden, Ellie Nash, a host of others, as well as excellent interviews and some outstanding philosophical reflections by Farkas, Vogel, Kelso and Rice. Some of the creative work and some of the interpretation is of course contentious, as it should be, and it's going to upset some people, but it really is a riot. It's a lot of fun. I can recommend it on all fronts. This isn't just for Cronenberg freaks and film students. This volume speaks to anybody interested in the visual and communicative culture of the last half century. Children of the New Flesh, 1111 books, links below.
Spring is here. I think the bad man's coming. Here at 10 blocks away.